let's assume that you had a good match with your volunteer and you wanted to go ahead and make an agreement with them. And so actually let's use you folks in the back because you needed to do a little bit more work to figure out what your match would be. You think there's a match, but you're not sure. So what you want to, what are the steps that you need to do to kind of get to that point of clarity? And in many cases, you'll have to do a little bit more work to get to that point of clarity. You still are thinking about this framework so that you want to bring these aspects of the framework into your discussion of the agreement that you're going to build. But you start out by really focusing in on defining the project. And that may be difficult because you may have started recruiting this volunteer just with a sort of a hunch of the project, and you haven't actually done the work to kind of map out the project yourself. So that's okay. You can use the volunteer as a person who's going to help you do that. So you might say, well, we know, let's use the Wink example, we know that we'd like to help our artists get a little bit more savvy about using social media and do better marketing. But you know, we just don't know this area, so we're really not sure what needs to be done or how it needs to be done, how long it's going to take to do it. And your volunteer might say, well, let me put together a timeline for what I think it would take, and let me put together a list of deliverables that I think I can provide to your organization. So you might kind of co-design it with your volunteer. If you're very knowledgeable about the project, you could design this in advance and you could present it to the volunteer, and you still want to leave it open for some input from the volunteer about ideas that they have or ways they might approach the problem. But when you're defining a project, you want to get into the scope of work, which is the what, how, and to what end, and be sure and focus on the to what end. So if we're going to do some social media, to what end? I mean, you can do social media until the cows come home and not have any result if you're not clear about what your goal is in using social media. What are the specific deliverables or outcomes, products that you're wanting to create? I want a marketing plan, I want a social media plan, I want a guide to how to use Twitter, I want a new Facebook cause site to be created. Those are deliverables or outcomes. What's the timeline? Is this a 6-month project, a 2-week project, a 1-year project? Most people are not going to want to commit for something more than about 4 months. I find that's the comfort zone. And that can vary with different age groups a little bit, but that's typically, if you think about a project and break it down into 4 months, and then at the end of 4 months, if there's still more to do and that volunteer still wants to work with you, you can create another project. Doesn't mean that the engagement has to end. What are the resources this person's going to need? And one of the key resources you want to get nailed down is what kind of access do they need to you? You know, the point that you made about the social worker isn't calling in the middle of the night like other volunteers were, because they know how to make judgments and handle things on their own. So it's important that they know what your expectations are about how much they check in with you, and you know what their expectations are about how much access. Because if this is a volunteer who's going to expect 2 hours of your time every week for the next 4 months, maybe this project's not that big a priority, right? If you don't have that time, then you don't want to make that deal. And then what's their accountability, and how are you going to evaluate their success? And ultimately, how are you going to sort of celebrate that success as well? But at this point, you're looking at what are you going to call, you know, what's going to tell you that the project is done and that it's completed the way that you intended for it to be completed. Defining that at the beginning, just like you do with a staff person, is going to make for a much more successful project than just saying to somebody, yeah, just whatever you think. I mean, whatever you do, that'll be okay. Because it probably isn't going to be okay. There's a very good chance that that volunteer is going to be on one page and you're going to be on another page, and you're not going to be satisfied with the outcome. Some things to watch for. There are 3 kinds of risks involved in a skills-based volunteer engagement. One is time sensitivity risk, which is that you and the volunteer think it's a 6-week project. They're going to work on it, you know, 3 or 4 hours a week. Turns out once they get into it, it's a 4-month project and they have to work on it 10 hours a week. And the volunteer starts to feel resentful, feels like this is not what I signed up for. I don't really have this time, I've got other things going on in my life, and the project goes to inevitable negative end because the time allowances were not in alignment. The second is scope creep risk, which is that you start with something that you think you've defined in a limited way, and you either start to say, well, yeah, could you do this, and well, how about this, and well, we really could use you doing this, and could you just help us out with this too? And the volunteer starts to feel taken advantage of because they didn't sign up for all of that. Or the reverse can happen, which is the volunteer takes the project further and starts to embellish upon it, and you feel like there are resources, time being spent by volunteers off in their own netherland, kind of creating something that you don't necessarily want to use. The third risk is sector knowledge risk, and this goes back to the issue of if you're working with people with professional skills who don't have a lot of understanding of the nonprofit sector, you may find that the projects that they do and the plans that they create are not really right-sized for your organization. We always tell our volunteers, you can come up with any solution that you want, as long as it doesn't involve spending more money or hiring more staff, right? Because most organizations, those are two things that they're not in the cards. And so the creativity that is required and a kind of understanding of your organization and your organization's processes is really critical to whether or not this person is going to do a good job for you. So think about those three things in each project. Develop a written agreement. Don't just rely on a person-to-person conversation. For one thing, you might forget what you said. I know I would. So you have to write it down, and you have to define what's the problem that you are trying to solve so that they stay focused on the problem and not just on the solution. What are the expectations for when it's going to be done? Generally, how are they going to do it? Where will the resources come from? What are their deliverables? What products and so forth, including if you want to see a draft before something is final, you need to define that you want to see that draft. And then the accountability and evaluation. So all those things should be in a written document. And again, you can, with a lot of professional volunteers, you can have them help you create this. But don't go into a relationship without something written down that defines what that relationship is. On your table is a little chart. If you can take a look at that chart really quickly and just go down and kind of score where you think your organization is on each of these readiness elements. This is where, I think as a sector, where we're kind of clustered, which is we got pieces of this. Most of the pieces we have to do with having a really well-structured general volunteer program. Because if your general volunteer program is really well-structured and you've thought through position descriptions and accountabilities and who's in charge and how are you evaluating people and how are you rewarding them for your regular volunteers, then that tends to carry over with skill-based volunteers, but it still needs to be customized for those skills-based volunteers. Well, and we're going to talk next about the demographic trends that are driving literally thousands of skill-based volunteers your way. So one of the things I hope you leave here with today is that you don't have the sense that you won't get these people. You will get these people. It may take finding the right angle. It may take reworking the position descriptions. It may be redefining what you ask them to do, breaking it into littler pieces or putting it into bigger pieces so they can have more impact. You'll have to work with it a little bit. But these folks are out there, and they're out there in the thousands. And people come to our organization and they say, I had no idea there was an organization like this. This is exactly what I was looking for. And most of the time, these are people who do regular volunteering. They are docents at the Museum of Flight. They go to the food bank once a week and volunteer. They drive their neighbor to the doctor. They do all the regular volunteer things that people in our communities do. But they're hungry for an opportunity to do something that it has a little bit more impact on a problem that they care about, and for something that really challenges them to use their skills in a new and creative way. So I really hope that you all do not leave here thinking that those folks are not there for your organization, because I'm 100% confident that they're there. It just can take some time to figure out how to find them and how to work with them successfully. So we're going to talk a little bit about the generational issues in working with skilled-based volunteers. And we're going to do what most of these discussions about generational issues always do, which is then leave out people in the middle. I always feel sad for people in their 40s because we talk about the 20s and 30s and we talk about the 50 pluses, and the middle generation tends to not get that much attention. But let's talk about volunteers in their 20s and 30s. Some good kind of general advice is one of the things you want to do is you want to give people options. You want to give people a chance that you haven't just sort of rammed them into one potential role, that you've kind of given them some choice, because choice is a very big thing with this generation. You want to be flexible, but still clear about the expectations, and flexible about when and how and exactly in what way something happens, but very clear about what you expect in your outcomes. And that goes back to that general contracting or general agreement making process we talked about earlier. It's a good idea to engage people in a small project first. So if we take the WINC and the Trung volunteer option here, or example here, you might want to ask her to just give you some guidance on social media first, if she's a 20s to 30s volunteer, and then wait to bring in the larger marketing project and see how she does first with that smaller project. Be open to how things get done. They often get done electronically and not in meetings, not face-to-face, often not on a time schedule that was originally set, because a lot of other things are going on in people's lives at this part of their careers and their personal lives. And really appreciate their technology knowledge and expertise, and rather than be kind of afraid of it, embrace that and tell them that you admire what they can do. They may know tools that you don't know how to use, and you encourage them to bring that into your organization and into the work that they're doing, rather than kind of give people the sense that they're being silly because they're on their phones all the time, or or doing Facebook updates 3 times a day. So that kind of sense of derision sometimes comes through when older people are working with younger people, and you want to be careful of that. On the other side, working with skilled volunteers over 50, one of the things to consider is we've got 10,000 people turning 60 each day. 25% of the population are boomers. That's just the boomers, not boomers and older. So these folks are out there, they're out, you live in this wonderful community where people are retiring, coming back after careers, or building careers here and working remotely all over the world. These folks are highly educated. They prefer project-based work because they also have a lot going on. Most people don't retire completely these days. They kind of slide into retirement, and then they sort of slide back out, they slide back in. And so you have to be prepared that somebody who came to you with a lot of time on their hands may suddenly, either because of family circumstances or because they've decided to go back to work, or they're doing contracting or consulting type work, their time might tighten up. They want to know the expectations because they're very focused on meeting your expectations, where the 20s to 30s might kind of want to know your long-term kind of big picture goal and not be that interested in the details of your expectations. People over 50 tend to want to know with a lot of detail exactly what do you want me to do, and how are you going to judge whether what I did was good or not. And they want to know from you what that's going to look like to you. They want to see the impact, and that's something that both generations heavily share. There's opportunities at both ends of the spectrum, and there's obviously opportunities in the middle of that spectrum and beyond the boomer population as well. But these are populations that I think you should give some special strategy to and some special thought to as to how you would attract those populations and where you would go and who you would talk to, what the networking opportunities are that are going to get you to those boomers and to those 20s and 30s folks. So we've got just a couple more minutes. What would you say, do you feel like you're a little bit more prepared to use volunteers? Use skilled volunteers? What would you say is your biggest barrier walking out of here today?
Funding.
Funding? You do need to think about whether you're asking the volunteer to create something that's going to, down the road, have a negative effect on your financial balance in the organization. But just remember, you could be also asking these volunteers to help with that problem. They could be people who could take on lobbying on your behalf with funders. They could be taking on organizing fundraisers. They could be taking on developing new prospects as donors and so forth. So, if the challenge that comes up for you is resources, just realize that these people are resources. They just don't come with a grant check, but they really do bring you hardcore, they have the capacity to bring you hardcore financial resources as one option. Your long-term committed skills-based volunteers, the main thing they want to know is that they're having an impact, that they are seen and valued for who they are and what they're contributing, and that you said thank you to them. And that's, for most people, that's what they want. They find their way in their lives to the other things they need. So I don't think you should ever feel bad. It's always great to be able to do more, do something special. But one of the most important things you can do is help that volunteer truly see the impact they're having on your organization and on the people you're serving.